The man in front of her had exactly $12.40. Rayner could see it in the way he kept rearranging items on the belt, sliding a box of crackers to the side, then pushing it back, calculating in his head the way poor people do when they cannot afford to be wrong. He was maybe 65, wearing a thin canvas jacket that was not meant for January, and his hands had the dry, cracked look of someone who worked outdoors or used to. The cashier waited with the practiced blankness of someone who had watched this particular scene many times. The total on the register said $41.17. The man looked at it for a long moment. Rena was third in line. She had come in for 3 things: a carton of milk, a bag of rice, and a small bottle of children's cough syrup for her daughter Cora, who had been running a fever since Sunday and coughing in her sleep with a rattling sound that kept Rena awake, pressing her hand flat to the child's back just to feel that it was still moving. She had $120 in her wallet. It was every dollar she had. The rent was due in 4 days. She stepped around the woman behind the man, around a cart full of sparkling water and organic crackers, and she set her 3 items beside his on the belt. "Ring them together," she said to the cashier. The old man turned to look at her. He had pale grey eyes, steady and watchful under heavy brows, and he did not say anything for a moment. "I can manage," he said. "I know you can," Rena told him. "Let me." The cashier scanned everything through. Rena paid $53.19, which left her with $66.81 and a rent deadline that was not going to move. The man watched her put the change back in her wallet. She handed him his bags and picked up her own single bag, and that was the whole of it. He said quietly, so only she heard, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, and walked out into the January cold. She did not know his name. She did not ask. There was no reason she would ever see him again, and she had 4 days to figure out where $41 was going to come from. She never figured it out. But something else came instead. If you have ever stood in a grocery line and watched someone put something back on the shelf before they reach the register, you already know what that moment costs. You know the particular geometry of choosing food when the money runs out before the list does. And maybe you have wondered, in the way that good people do, what the right thing to do really is when there is no safe margin. If you have asked that question, keep watching. Because what Rena did next is the part of this story that matters most. Rena Dalton was 38 years old, and she had been working at the Seaview Extended Care Facility for 11 years. Her title was Certified Nursing Assistant, which meant she spent 8 to 10 hours a shift doing the kind of work that other people prefer not to think about: bathing and turning and feeding and sitting with patients whose families came on weekends, if they came at all. She earned $19.40 an hour. At 40 hours a week before taxes, before the $65 a month deducted for the employee health plan that covered herself and Cora, that worked out to a life that required precision. She knew exactly how much she had at any moment. $66.81 after the grocery bill was not enough for rent, and she knew it. She had been raising Cora alone for 6 years, since Cora's father had left for a job in another city that turned out not to require his return. He called on birthdays, usually. Cora was 7 now, small and watchful, with a habit of reaching for Rena's hand in public that Rena privately considered the greatest gift she had ever been given. She also had a habit of asking questions that had no easy answers, the kind that arrived at bedtime when Rena was trying to get her settled. Questions like, why does God let people be poor? Or would we be poor if Daddy stayed? And Rena had learned to sit with those questions and answer them honestly in the plainest possible language, because she believed children deserved honest language even when adults found it hard to speak. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had a working elevator approximately half the time. The building was called Magnolia Court, which bore no relationship to any magnolia Rena had ever seen in the vicinity, and it had a lobby that smelled permanently of floor cleaner and a mailbox area where one of the boxes had been broken since last winter. Rena's apartment was Unit 3C. She had painted the living room herself when she moved in, a soft gold colour that she had picked because the light in the western window hit it in the late afternoon in a way that made the whole room feel warmer than it was. The landlord, Mr. Hassan, had said nothing about the painting. She had taken his silence as permission. The rent was $740 a month. and it had been $740 for 3 years, which Rena counted as a minor miracle she never took for granted. Before 3C, she had lived in a one-bedroom in a building further east, where the heat had gone out twice in the same winter, and the management company had taken 3 weeks each time to fix it. $740 for a two-bedroom with heat that worked was the kind of number she knew precisely why she was grateful for. 11 years at Seaview meant she had known it when it was smaller, when the third-floor corridor she now worked had been the overflow ward. And there were only 14 long-term beds. It had expanded twice. She had stayed. She had turned down a position at the county hospital twice, once because the pay difference did not offset the commute, and once because she knew the names of her patients and their morning preferences, and which of them needed the blinds opened, and which of them needed the blinds left closed, and that knowledge felt like something worth protecting. She knew that Seaview was not a prestigious institution. She knew that care work was the kind of work that people thanked you for in the abstract and underpaid you for in the particular. She had made a decision about that a long time ago, and she did not relitigate it on the hard shifts. She got home that evening to find Cora sitting up in bed with her colouring books, flushed but not worse. Rena took her temperature, 101.2. She gave her a measured dose of the cough syrup and sat with her while she fell back asleep, listening for the rattling sound, and when it did not come, she exhaled slowly and went to the kitchen table to look at her numbers. She was $111 short for rent. Her next paycheck came in 8 days, not 4. She could call her landlord, Mr. Hassan, and ask for an extension. He had given her one before, 3 years ago, when Cora had needed an ear tube procedure. He was not a cruel man, but Rena had not liked how she had felt asking. She had not liked the particular vulnerability of it, the way needing a favour from a man who could put her on the street always reset a relationship in ways that were hard to undo. She preferred to find another way. She could ask her co-worker Dina, who would say yes without hesitation, and ask nothing in return, but Dina had her own 2 kids and Rena had borrowed $30 from her in October and had not fully squared it yet. She could ask her sister Val in Baltimore, who would also say yes, but Val had said last month that she was behind on her own car payment, and Rena had not forgotten that and would not use Val's worry to solve her own. She sat at the table until 10:30 and then she went to bed. She was up at 5:15 to get to her shift by 6. She would think of something. She always had. 4 days later, she didn't have $111. She called Mr. Hassan. He let her slide the deadline a week. His voice was kind and neutral, the way his voice always was, and he said, "That's fine, Rena, just let me know." And she thanked him and hung up and stood in her kitchen feeling the small, particular weight of owing something to someone who didn't have to be kind to her. That was a Thursday. On Saturday morning, exactly 9 days after she had paid for a stranger's groceries with money she did not have, someone knocked on her door. She was not expecting anyone. Cora had recovered from her fever by Wednesday and was currently in the living room watching cartoons with the volume turned down the way Rena had taught her because they shared a wall with the elderly neighbour, Mr. Park, who worked night shifts. Rena opened the door. A woman stood in the hallway. She was maybe 40, wearing a neat grey coat, and she was holding a white envelope. Behind her, slightly down the hall as if he had stayed back to give the woman room, stood the old man from the grocery store. Rena looked at him. He had colour in his face that he had not had in the grocery store, and he was wearing a better coat, dark wool, well fitted. He met her eyes and gave a small, precise nod. The woman said, "Ms. Dalton, my name is Patricia Osei. I work for Callaway Capital Group." Rena had heard of Callaway Capital Group. Anyone who followed financial news at all, or who had a co-worker like Dina who talked about it, had heard of Callaway Capital Group. It was, among other things, the third largest private bank in the state and the parent company of a community credit institution that had been in the news the past 2 years for expanding low-interest home loan programs in exactly the neighbourhoods Rena had lived in her whole life. It was also, as Rena was about to learn, the company that Theodore Callaway had built from a single branch office over 40 years, starting with a loan of $12,000 from a church fund in 1983, and which he still ran at 71 as chairman and majority shareholder. Theodore Callaway was the man from the grocery store. He had not been on his way to or from anything that looked like banking. He had been at the bus stop near the Seaview Road Marketplace because the car that was supposed to drive him had been delayed, and he had decided to walk. He had decided to walk because he did that sometimes, walk through the neighborhoods his banks operated in, because he believed that a banker who only knew a place from a boardroom did not know it at all. He had gone into the grocery store because he was cold, and because there was something about the warmth of a grocery store in January that he had loved since childhood. He had loaded his basket with things he did not especially need and taken them to the register, and in the process of doing the arithmetic in his head the way he still did, out of habit, the way his mother had taught him, he had discovered that he had forgotten his wallet. He had not forgotten his wallet in 30 years. He owned the coat he was wearing and 3 others, and each of them had a credit card in the breast pocket. Somehow on this particular afternoon, in this particular coat, there was nothing. He had counted the contents of his trouser pockets in the aisle and come up with $12.40, and the arithmetic was plain. He was watching himself decide to put back the crackers when the woman 3 people behind him came forward and said, "Ring them together." He had watched her pay. He had seen the way her hand went back into the wallet without hesitation and came out with the right amount without counting. The practiced efficiency of someone who always knows exactly what they have. He had seen the wallet close and go into a coat pocket that had a small tear at the seam, just beginning to come loose. He had said what he said to her, and she had said what she said and walked out. And for a long moment he had stood there holding his grocery bags and feeling something he could not immediately name. He had not let himself be observed noticing things. It was a discipline he had developed over decades, a way of watching without appearing to watch, because a man in his position who visibly catalogued people in public made people uncomfortable, and he was always in some kind of public. So he watched Rena leave without appearing to watch, and then he went outside and called his assistant and described the woman and the store and gave a single instruction: find out who she is. It had taken 4 days. She was not difficult to find. She had paid with a card. What his assistant found was a picture of a life that Theodore recognized because he had grown up at its edges and because he had been looking at that picture through reports and data and the testimony of loan officers and community partners for 40 years. She was 38, a CNA at Seaview Extended Care, 11 years on the job, 1 daughter, single household. The numbers that went with those facts were familiar to him in the way that patterns become familiar after you have traced them long enough. The gap between what the work cost and what the work paid, the absence of a buffer, the sequence of priorities that left no room for the unexpected. The grocery bill she had paid for him was not a small amount for her. His assistant had been careful to note that. He had wanted to know if she would have told anyone about what she did. He had his assistant make 3 quiet inquiries, conversations that would not have looked like inquiries to anyone being asked. Her co-worker, Dina Knox, reached through a community health council, mentioned Rena as someone on the facility's employee appreciation list, patient and good with the hard cases. Her neighbour, a Mr. James Park, who had been approached about something unrelated entirely, mentioned in passing that the woman across the hall always knew when he had worked a hard night and had more than once left a container of food outside his door. Neither of them mentioned a grocery store. Neither of them mentioned a stranger's bill. She had not told anyone. He held that fact for a moment before moving forward. He had been in the position of giving things to people for most of his professional life, and he had learned, over time, the difference between a gift that was accepted and a gift that was needed and a gift that was deserved. The difference was not in the gift, it was in what had preceded it. He thought about the woman's hand going into the wallet without counting, the efficiency of someone who already knew exactly what was there. He thought about the tear in the coat pocket seam, just beginning to open. He called Patricia Ossie, his chief community officer, and told her what he knew. He told her what he wanted to do. Patricia had said, characteristically, that it was his money and his call, and then she had said, also characteristically, that she thought it was the right thing. He had told her he was coming with her. She had learned long ago not to argue with him about that kind of thing. Raina stood in her doorway looking at this woman in the grey coat and the man she had bought groceries for 9 days ago, and she thought several things at once. She thought about Cora in the living room. She thought about the fact that she had not told anyone about the grocery store, not even Dina. She thought about the white envelope. She did not move right away. "I don't understand," she said. "Mr. Calloway would like to explain," Patricia said, "if you're willing to hear him." The old man stepped forward. He was not small, Calloway. He was broad in the shoulder and had the upright posture of someone who had made a decision about bearing himself a long time ago and kept it. He stopped at a respectful distance, and he looked at her with those pale grey eyes. "I forgot my wallet," he said. "That doesn't happen to me. But it happened, and you were there, and you did what you did, and I want to know if you'll let me do something for you in return." Rena said, "That's not why I did it." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." She let them in. She made coffee because that was what she did when people came to her home, and while the coffee brewed, Cora came to the kitchen doorway and looked at the strangers and said, "Hi." He looked at the child and said, "Good morning," with a gravity that Cora apparently found agreeable because she nodded as if confirming something and went back to her cartoons. They sat at the table where Rena had done her arithmetic 4 days earlier. Patricia set the envelope down. She explained, without ceremony, what was in it. There was a check for $5,000 which could be used for anything. There was also an offer contingent on nothing and requiring nothing of Rena in return. Enrollment in Callaway Capital's Workforce Home Ownership Program, a program specifically for employees of partnering community care institutions, of which Seaview Extended Care was one, which offered a low-interest mortgage pathway, an assigned financial counsellor, and a matched savings component in which the program would match whatever Rena saved toward a down payment dollar for dollar up to $15,000. The goal of the program was home ownership. The timeline was up to the participant. There was no deadline, no penalty for slow progress, and no obligation to stay in the program if Rena decided it was not for her. Patricia spoke in the measured, patient register of someone who knew that she was asking a person to hear a great deal of information at once and had decided that the most respectful thing to do was say it plainly and then stop. She didn't undersell it, and she did not oversell it. She laid it on the table like the facts it was and folded her hands and waited. Rena sat for a while without speaking. She was aware of him across the table from her. He had not said anything since they sat down. He held his coffee cup with both hands and looked at the table, not at her, giving her the room to process what she was processing without the pressure of being watched. She noticed that about him, the studied patience of it, the quality of someone who understood that information needed time to settle. The coffee finished brewing, and she got up and poured 3 cups and set them on the table and sat back down. $5,000 was, at her current wage, what she brought home after taxes in approximately 9 weeks. It was also the exact amount of the 3 separate moments in the past 2 years when she had said to herself, "If I just had $5,000, I could breathe." She had said it when Cora's shoes wore through in winter and she was deciding between the shoes and the electric bill. She had said it when the car needed a repair that she had put off so long that the repair became 2 repairs. She had said it when a co-worker at Seaview had announced she was leaving for a better-paying position, and Rena had sat in the break room for 15 minutes afterward, doing math in her head, discovering for the 400th time that the math did not change. $5,000 would not change the math forever. She was too precise a person to believe that it would, but it would change the position she was calculating from, and that was different from nothing. That was, in fact, everything. "Why me?" she said. It was not quite a question. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He had the hands of a man who had done physical work early in his life, large-knuckled and steady. "I've spent 40 years opening branches in neighborhoods like this one," he said. "I have been very careful about how I talk about that work because I am aware of how it can sound. I want you to know I'm not telling you this to have you think well of me." He paused. "I forgot my wallet on the one afternoon in 30 years that I happened to be carrying none of my cards in the one store in this zip code that I happened to walk into, and the person who helped me was someone who could not afford to. I have a certain relationship with coincidence," Rena said. "Faith?" He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. She picked up the envelope. She looked at it for a moment, then set it down. "I need to think," she said. "Of course," Patricia said. She slid a card across the table. "No pressure and no timeline on the thinking. The offer stands." They finished their coffee. There was a quality to the silence between the 3 of them, not awkward exactly, but careful, the kind of silence that develops when people are being honest with each other and know it. He asked how long she had been at Seaview, and Rena told him 11 years, and he nodded as if that confirmed something he already believed. Patricia asked if there were aspects of the home ownership program she wanted clarified before deciding, and Rena said not yet. She needed to sit with the whole shape of it first. Patricia said that was sensible. Cora appeared again in the doorway long enough to study the old man with the same frank assessment she applied to everything, and then announced that she was hungry, which dissolved whatever solemnity had gathered in the room, and Rena got up and made her daughter a bowl of oatmeal, and the two visitors let themselves out. She stood at the counter stirring the oatmeal and listening to Cora drag her chair across the floor to the table, and she did not think about anything for a minute. She just listened to the sounds of her daughter settling in. Then she thought about it. She called her sister Val that evening. Val, who always said what she thought, listened to the whole story without interrupting, which was unusual, and then said, "Rena, take it." Rena said she was not sure it felt right to take $5,000 from someone she had helped on a grocery run. Val said, "What did you do the night of the grocery run?" Rena did not answer. "You sat at the kitchen table and did math until 10:30 in the evening," Val said. "I know because you called me afterward and you did not mention the groceries, but I could hear it in your voice. You have been doing that math your whole adult life. You did it when you were 19 and Mama was in the hospital and you were working doubles to cover the co-pays. You did it the year Cora was born and Tony was already gone. You're still doing it at 38 at 10:30 at night. Let somebody change the math." Rena was quiet. "You didn't do it for a reward," Val said. "That's exactly why you deserve one." She called the number on Patricia's card on Monday morning. She said she would accept the check and she wanted to know more about the home ownership program. Patricia told her she would send someone to the house that week, a counselor named Marcus Webb, who worked specifically with care workers and would walk her through every step at whatever pace she needed. Marcus came on Wednesday. He was patient and unhurried and had a yellow legal pad on which he wrote nothing Rena did not ask him to write, and by the end of 2 hours she had a clearer picture of her actual financial position than she had ever had, which was both better and worse than she had estimated. Better because she had more capacity than her anxiety had told her. Worse because her anxiety had not been wrong about the structural precarity. Marcus said the word precarity without embarrassment, the way someone says a word when they mean it to be useful rather than clinical, and Rena appreciated that. He laid out a pathway. It was not a pathway that involved shortcuts or assumptions about extra income she did not have. It was a pathway built on what she actually earned and what she actually spent, and where, over the next 18 to 24 months, the matched savings program could move her. He showed her the math. It was not different math than the math she had been doing all her life. It was the same math with a different starting position, and the difference that made was not small. She had one question for him before he left. "Does he do this often?" she said. "Mr. Calloway." Marcus considered the question for a moment. "The program has been running for 6 years, he said. "I've worked with 41 households. There are other counsellors working other cases." He paused. "He doesn't usually come himself." Rena thought about that. Marcus came back 2 weeks later, then once a month. He was consistent in the way that trustworthy people are consistent, not emphatic about it, just there. By April, Rena had opened the Match savings account and put in her first $200. She stood at the bank counter and watched the teller print the receipt, and she folded it in half and put it in her wallet beside her transit card and her daughter's library card, in the slot where she had kept, for the past 3 years, a small photograph of her mother. She did not stop being careful with money. She did not stop knowing exactly how much she had in her wallet at any given moment. She did not stop doing the arithmetic in her head the way her mother had taught her, because those habits were not anxiety, they were competence, and she was not interested in unlearning competence. What changed was the margin. The margin changed. That, she came to understand over the following months, was the thing that the people who talked about poverty in the abstract usually missed. The problem was not that poor people did not know how to manage money. The problem was that the margin was too thin for management to matter. You could be the most precise calculator alive, and it would not help you when the number you were calculating from was simply not enough. The margin was the thing. Give a person who already knew how to manage a sufficient margin and watch what happened. What happened in Rena's case was that she slept better. That was the first thing she noticed. The arithmetic that ran in her head on the edge of sleep, the loop of numbers that had been her company in the small hours for as long as she could remember, began to quiet. Not immediately, not all at once, But by May, she was waking less often and staying awake less long, and she had not realized until the absence of it how much of her energy had been going into that particular vigil. Meanwhile, the things she had not told anyone continued to circulate in the way that true things sometimes do. Dina found out in May, through a chain of knowing that Rena was never entirely able to reconstruct. Dina came to her at the start of a shift looking as if she had several things to say and was choosing between them. She settled on one. "Someone told me you paid for his groceries." Rena said, "I paid for an old man's groceries." Dina looked at her for a moment. She had known Rena for 8 years. She had covered Rena's shifts when Cora was sick, and Rena had covered hers when Dina's boys had school performances or doctor appointments, the unwritten economy of women in the same kind of life. She knew Rena's rent amount. She knew what Rena's grocery bill usually came to. She was doing the math. "Girl," she said, with a tone that contained approximately 6 different emotions at once. "I didn't know," Rena told her, which was the truest thing she could say. Dina was quiet for 3 steps of their walk down the corridor. Then she said, "I'm glad you didn't know. If you'd known, you might not have done it." Rena considered that. She was not sure it was true. She thought she probably would have done it anyway because the man had needed his groceries paid for and she had been the person standing there, and those 2 facts did not change because of who he was. She did not say this to Dina. It seemed like the kind of thing that went without saying. Rena went to work. She had a full corridor that morning, including a patient named Clara, 81, who had been at Seaview for 4 months and received visitors only sporadically, and was one of the patients Rena had come to think of as hers, in the way that certain patients became yours not by assignment, but by accumulated presence. Clara had arrived at Seaview after a fall that had come at the end of a year that had also contained the death of her husband of 53 years, and she carried both griefs in her body in a way that manifested as a particular stillness, a settled quality that Rena recognized as the behavior of someone who has decided to be very quiet for a while and wait. Clara liked the blinds open exactly halfway. She liked her morning pills with orange juice, not water, and she liked to hear the weather report even if she had no plans to go outside. She had grown up in Georgia and still spoke with a softness around her vowels that appeared most often in the hour after breakfast when she was relaxed. She had a granddaughter who came on Sunday afternoons when she could make the drive, a young woman named Britt, who sat in the chair by the window and talked about things happening in her life, while Clara listened with her eyes half closed in the expression of someone who is paying close attention, but conserving the energy the expression requires. Clara had a habit of reaching for Rena's wrist when she came in the morning, not to hold it, but just to touch it, a brief acknowledgement of arrival. Rena had learned to arrive on Clara's side first, so the touch could happen without Clara having to wait. That morning, Clara was awake and quiet, and when Rena came in, she reached for her wrist and held it a moment longer than usual. "You look different," Clara said. Rena said, "Do I?" "Something's easier," Clara said. "Here." She pointed vaguely at Rena's face. Then she let go of the wrist and turned her head toward the window. "That's a good thing," she said. "Don't argue with it." Rena did not argue with it. She adjusted the blinds to halfway and read Clara the weather and went to her next room. Rena thought about what Clara had said for the rest of the shift. She did not know if Clara was right. She thought maybe what Clara was seeing was not ease exactly, but something close to it. The quality of having a plan. Of knowing that the math, for the first time in a long time, had a different character. Not solved, not finished, just different. She told her landlord, Mr. Hassan, in June that she was working toward buying a place. She was not sure why she told him. She had not planned to. He was collecting the rent check and she handed it to him and said, almost as an aside, that she was in a home ownership program and she would probably be looking for something in about 2 years. He said, "That's good, Rena," and she could hear that he meant it, not as a landlord who would need to find a new tenant, but as a person who knew something about a long road. She bought Cora new shoes in July. Cora had needed them since May, but Rena had been managing the timing because the old ones were still holding up and there had always been something more urgent. In July, there was not something more urgent, and she drove Cora to the shoe store on a Saturday morning and let her pick the ones she wanted. Cora picked a pair of purple sneakers with silver laces and wore them out of the store, walking with the slightly high-stepped gait of someone breaking in new shoes, and Rena watched her and felt something that she could not have named at the time. She named it later, lying in bed that night. It was the specific, physical sensation of not having made the calculation, of having bought the shoes without first checking whether the shoes could be bought. She cried a little, quietly in the dark, and then she went to sleep. He sent her a note in September. It was handwritten, which surprised her, on plain cream stationery with no letterhead. He wrote that he hoped she was well and that Marcus had told him, with only as much detail as Rena had authorized, that the program was going well. He wrote that he had been thinking about something she said that morning at her kitchen table, the word she had used, and that it was the right word, and he was glad she had used it. He did not name the word. He signed it with his first name only. Theodore, she wrote back. She was not a natural letter writer, but she found that she wanted to write back, and she sat at the kitchen table with a piece of lined notebook paper and wrote 2 paragraphs. She said that the program was going well and that her daughter had new shoes. She said she was glad he had walked into that store. She did not sign it formally. She just wrote her name. They exchanged 3 more letters over the following year. Not long letters. The letters of 2 people who had something specific to say and did not feel the need to say more than that. In the spring of the following year, 14 months after the Saturday morning in the grocery store, she closed on a 2-bedroom house on Marsh Road. It was not a large house. The kitchen was galley style, and one of the bedroom windows stuck in humid weather, and the backyard was a long, narrow strip that backed up to a chain-link fence. The neighborhood was the kind that real estate listings called up and coming, which Rena understood to mean that it had not yet been discovered by people with enough money to change it, and she had decided she was not going to spend any energy resenting what might come later when she could spend that energy on what was here now. It was hers. She signed the papers at a title company office on a Tuesday afternoon with Marcus Webb sitting beside her and the financial counselor who had taken over her monthly sessions, a woman named Joy, sitting on the other side. Joy had come into the picture in October when Marcus had transitioned her to the next phase of the program, and she was serious and exacting in the way that people are serious when they love precision, which was a quality Rena respected. When the last signature was finished, Marcus said, "Congratulations, homeowner." And Joy said nothing at all but squeezed Rena's hand once, hard, and that was enough. Rena drove Cora to the house that evening. She did not tell her where they were going. Cora looked out the window with the focused interest she brought to all unfamiliar routes, tracking landmarks the way she had been doing since she was 4 years old, and when Rena stopped in front of the house, Cora looked at it for a moment. "Is that ours?" she said. Rena said, "Yes." Cora was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time for Cora. Then she said, "Can I have the back bedroom?" Rena laughed. It came out harder than she expected, the way laughter does when it has been waiting a while, and Cora looked at her with the combination of delight and mild alarm that was her particular expression when her mother was being too much, and Rena laughed a little more and then stopped and got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the house and looked at it. It was an ordinary house. Beige aluminum siding, a small concrete porch with a wrought iron railing that needed painting. The front door was dark green, which she had noticed during the walkthrough and liked without understanding why, and later realized it was because her mother's front door had been dark green, a fact she had not consciously held for 20 years. The front yard had a Japanese maple that would be beautiful in the fall. She had noticed the maple during the walkthrough and thought about it every week since. It was bare now, still March, but she could already see what it would do in October. The particular rust and gold of it, the way it would fill the yard with something that looked nothing like anything she had had access to before, and would belong to her entirely. She heard Cora get out of the car and come stand beside her, and she felt the small, familiar pressure of her daughter's hand finding hers. She held it. She had stood in a grocery line 11 years before this moment and decided who she was going to be. She had not known then that she was making that decision. She had just been herself. She had just been a woman who saw what was happening 3 people ahead of her and could not leave it alone. The cost had been real. $111 that she had not had, a conversation with her landlord she had not wanted to have, a week of arithmetic that had not resolved itself. The cost had been real, and she had paid it without asking for anything, and she had walked out into January without looking back. She had not done it to be rewarded. She had done it because she was Rena Dalton, who had been taught by her mother that you are not a good person in the moments when it costs you nothing. You're a good person in the moments when it costs you something, and you do it anyway. The reward had found her without her asking. That was the part she had held quietly in herself in the months since that she had not known how to talk about, that the world had not missed it, that someone had been watching, not with any intent to reward, but just because they were paying attention and what they had seen had mattered to them. She had not needed it to matter, but it had. That was the part that unmade her every time she thought about it, quietly and without warning, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Not that she had been given something, that she'd been seen. There is a woman somewhere in your life who has been doing the math for years and has never once let it make her unkind. You may not know what the math is. She may not have told you, but she is keeping it, and she is still showing up, and she is still seeing what needs to be done and doing it, and the margin she is working with is nothing like what she deserves. If you know who she is, if her face came to mind just now, go tell her. Not tomorrow, today. Rena and Cora stood on the sidewalk in the early evening of a Tuesday in March, and the Japanese maple was still bare, but there were buds on it, small and tight and promising everything. Cora said, "Can we get a dog?" Rena looked down at her. "One thing at a time," she said. Cora considered this. "So that's a maybe," she said. "That is a maybe," Rena confirmed. She squeezed her daughter's hand, and they stood there together in front of their house in the last of the evening light, and Rena let herself stay in that moment without calculating it, without measuring it against anything, without adding up what it had cost or what it was worth. She just let it be hers, and it was.